Hello, and welcome back to Bumblebee, my detective friends. For today's video, the top 10 ancient Roman legal cases that shocked the world. Alright, I want to start small and warm us up, so let's meet the Turncoat Arminus. Unbeknownst to the Romans, their one-time barbarian ally, the Germanic chieftain, had a change of heart on the 9th of September, 9 CE, and decided it would be kinda silly and fun, to lure 36,000 Roman soldiers to their death. The deadly ambush was set up in the Teutoburg forest, where the friend of Arminius, Publius Varius, was leading the troops. When they were pounced upon, as many as 20,000 Roman troops are cut down in the carnage. Varius was horrified by the betrayal. He had just defended this man to the Roman courts only weeks prior due to suspicions of a coup being somewhere in the kingdom. Now he saw the consequences of his actions, and it was the chopped up mincemeat that was once his army. So Varius threw himself on his sword. This was a bad time for Emperor Augustus already, so this is notoriously the story of him getting told the news and it making him bang his head repeatedly into a marble column while crying to Varius' dead ghost to give him back his legions. Dude was in his 70s and running the Roman Empire was stressful, no doubt. Tiptoeing up the escalation stairs, we'll do Marcus Manlius next. Hear that? Manly is in the literal middle name. Now I know it's his last name, but just let me have that, okay? So this is the second known case of Perdulio, a type of top-notch extremist level betrayal charge, and it was a good old Marcus that was slapped with that title. Manlius was a celebrity as of like 390 or 387 BCE, since he defended the Capitoline Hill against a band of Celts that had annihilated a Roman army and captured the city itself. A few years later, he became the champion of the common people because he was anti-debt and anti-debt bonded, which would definitely make the notables hate him, especially the Roman establishment. Manlius is seen as a threat and subsequently accused of aspiring a regnum. One of the traditions mentioned by Livius, he was condemned by the Duumviri and thrown from the Tarpinian Rock. This was a fat spit in the face to the former hero, seeing as the Tarpinian Rock is part of the Capitoline Hill, which Manlius had defended so courageously for the same twist of being tossed off of it. There's a lot of cool names on this list, but I'd say this one is pretty up there. It's Furius Cresimus. According to Pliny the Elder, in ancient times, jealousy, bitterness, and disbelief towards other people were at 100% visibility if they achieved even bare minimum success. Gaius Furius Creminius, a farmer from Italy, is a literal court documented case of this. He was just really good at gardening and farming, just a total green thumb type, and he worked hard and he was organized. He had well-groomed animals and servants and was able to achieve really large crops, which the neighbors were jealous of, especially because he'd just moved in and they had the head start. How was he doing this? Well, if you got a small brain and no logic, you're gonna assume witchcraft. His neighbors gaggle together and sue him for magically poisoning their crops during the night. The Roman magistracy is then prosecuting him under the provision in the law of the 12 tables, which punished by death or the loss of citizenship if anyone is convicted of using magic to take away the fertility of someone else's soil. It is the only known trial where this law played a role. On the day of court, Creminius cruised in the city before the Curule Adil and peeved neighbors, loaded down with his farming tools in excellent condition and healthy, content, well-fed animals and servants. Since he was visibly just harder working, he just won, like that, and his neighbors learned something about the grass will always be greener on the other side. Let's meet the multi-charged Messalina, because she is the first recorded woman in the Julio-Claudian period of Rome to have multiple criminal charges, because if we're being real, women usually get executed on their first criminal charge, so makes sense she's one of the only. Emperor Claudius's third wife, she had a keen understanding of power politics, and her means of exercising power in politics circles was through criminal law, and not even a little. Like by 689, she even had her own regular prosecutor, P. Silius Rufus, whose services she was widely known to have employed. AKA Messalina's a Karen, and she's a true historical reminder why no matter how great a man Claudius was, especially in law and leadership, he had one weak spot. Absolutely bat-crap crazy women who would train wreck or bang just about anything. So let's run through some of Messalina's track record, shall we? So Messalina versus Julia Livilia in AD 41. Political accusations under the motive of Messalina's jealousy that secured the banishment and subsequent death of her husband's niece Julia, all because she didn't pay honor to Messalina or flatter her, and she was extremely beautiful. A year later, Messalina versus Appius Silenus, who is her literal stepdad, and it ends in his death. Why? Because she threw herself at him and he rejected her advances, so she told a soldier to tell Claudius that the soldier had a dream Silenus would kill Claudius. Dreams come true, so Claudius had Silenus smoked. Year after that, it's versus Canonius Justus, because the prefect had witnessed Messalina Messalina forcing moral degradation by making women commit adultery in the imperial palace while husbands were present, an act of humiliation and shame for all victims involved. Prefect Catatonius was going to snitch to the emperor about his wife's wild hobbies, but before he could, she had him charged with an undocumented crime that had him put to death. Honestly, I could keep going with Messalina. She's got quite the rap sheet, but we got bigger and better to move on to. Like, next up is the rescue of Sextus. The Roman names, man, they really go hard. So, Sextus Roscius was a farmer in 80 BC. His dad was killed in the streets of Rome with no witnesses. When Sextus is boo-hooing, almost the second his daddy-o is killed, their family estates were illegally added to the year past submission end dates for the prescription auctions by Lucius Cornelius Chrysogophonus, powerful freedman of the dictator Sulla, the same man who buys the estates worth millions for meager pennies from the auction. That's right, y'all, we got an ancient Roman scammer. So Lucius then conspired with two relatives of the deceased, named Titus and Titus, no, not a joke, to accuse the young Sextus of his father's murder. The case was so simple for the prosecution, as obviously Sextus had the most to gain from his father's death and hired someone to do the deed. Meanwhile, the Roman courtroom bad boy Caesarea picks up Sextus's defense and turned the whole trial around in his first ever major litigation by simply explaining the exact series of events I explained to you: conspiracy, auction, scam, etc. Caesarea argued that those who chose to align themselves with Lucius in the belief that they were supporting the nobility were wrong to do so, since his corruption was a stain on the Republic. His defense was a swinging success, and Sextus the Young is acquitted and his land returned. I hope you're curious, because the next is Trial of Curius. In 63 BCE, a trial took place in ancient Rome, which is still shrouded in mystery, even in its own time. And it serves as a reminder why the statute of limitations is in place, because Romans really charged a dude for a 37-year-old crime and perdilio, aka the super duper high treason. Saturnius works with Gaius Marius a lot. His support helps Marius in winning 7 consulships and securing land for veterans. Things go south though when Saturnius and another friend, Glaucia, are implied for 2 political slayings and put out a bill saying the lands they owned would be redistributed to the poor. When have rich people ever liked that news? So he put in the bill, if you fight against that, you lose your royal status. When representatives of the Senate came to Marius asking for his help, Marius, even in Plutarch's version, actually feigned a bad case of diarrhea to avoid having to deal with this. In the end, Saturnus and Glaucia are overpowered, forced to surrender, and stoned to death. Marius sadly has to abandon his buddy and moves on in his life for 37 years. One of the instigators against Marius can be identified with certainty. His name was Titus, again, and he must have been in his mid-30s during the trial, but wasn't born when the stoning even went down. But he knew his uncle was one of the victims and felt that was a pretty good way to get some fame and cash. They could have gone after a bunch of other options but Marius, someone who was friends with the victim, and weirdly he was their unspecified choice. He was charged with complicity, which he obviously denied, but where the hell was he gonna find witnesses 37 years later when most people died in this time at like 20? Thus, the insane charge of high treason as well as the killings. Caesarea, who acted as his defense, had done what he could, but he was no match for the bratty nepotism of Roman hierarchy, so Marius was crucified. Speak with your chest, baby girl, it's Marcia of Sentinum. There's lots of notable women lost to history thanks to sexism, but some remain on the blurred line. We know little about her. Her native city is an ancient Umbrian town, and her vague description is dark hair. The only Latin author that wrote of her is Valerius Maximus, and it's in his Memorable Deeds and Sayings text. He paid more attention to the action done by this woman because it isn't in compliance with the social and cultural values of ancient Rome. Messalina is one of those women who, as Valerius writes, were restrained from speaking in the forum and in the courts either by their sex or by the chastity of matronly dress. The men of Messalina's family were involved in the Great Umbrian Revolt of 90. For this reason, they couldn't defend her in court when she was put there in charges. We're not really sure what those charges are. According to the rules of all of ancient Rome, Messalina shouldn't have been able to defend herself, and she was a victim of circumstances, thus she was allowed to be able to. Valerius Maximus writes that because she had been accused, Messalina of Sentinum defended her own cause before a great crowd at the court-convened Praetor Lucius Titus, and having used all the techniques and devices of defense not only accurately but also courageously, she was acquitted at the first hearing and almost unanimously. So because she was concealed by a manly spirit in the guise of a woman, they call her androgynous. Nice. Love a poet, but their content is too happy for you? Consider banishment. Worked like a charm in the case of Ovid's exile. In December of 2017, similar to the writer and poet Dante, Rome's council unanimously approved a motion to repair the serious wrong suffered by Ovid, thought as one of the 3 canonical poets of Latin literature, by finally ending his exile. So, why exiled? Well, we have 3 factors at play. Ovid's sensual poetry was considered offensive, his attitude to the Emperor Augustus was too disrespectful, and he may have been involved in an unspecified plot or scandal. He was friends with a bunch of the members of the failed coup against Augustus in 6 AD, so it was believed he knew it was going to happen but didn't tell anyone, aka conspiracy. Rumors were also implied that he helped Julia in her many affairs, which scandalized Roman society and pissed off her hubby. And Ovid may have had an affair with the emperor's granddaughter. All we know is that in 8 AD, Ovid is booted out of Rome on personal orders of Augustus without due process. It was a big ol' scandal in the empire, but who's gonna say anything? We could go to Ovid for answers on what happened, but exile was brutal for him. He had to leave his wife and kids, so all he'd ever say, it was the result of a verse and a mistake. When Augustus died, the Pope and his family had real hopes under the order of banishment that it would be lifted. Unfortunately, the successor, Tiberius, was a cruel man and continued to forbid the poet's return. He died of unknown reasons in 17 or 18 AD. Imagine seeing Triple on the battlefield and it's not because he got conked on the head. The Hoatius Trial. It starts with 2 sets of triplets and 2 warring kings. Alba Longa has invaded some Roman territory, and the armies of Tullus meet them there, where the armies then discuss how to minimize the bloodshed. Only to notice that both sides happen to have brought sets of triplets to the front. It seems divinely sent, and divinely sent that the gods had this strange coincidence occur, so it was agreed that the 2 sets of 3 would be the only battlers. The Roman brothers Hoatius and the Alban brothers Curius duke it out to win and end the war. After 2 of his brothers are slain, the final Roman triplet uses a clever strategy to strike down his opponents and win. The armies go separate ways, and Hoatius is rejoiced by his people, but not his sister Hoatius, who is devastated to learn her fiance, one of those 3 triplets from the Albans, has been killed. Hoatius' great grief angers her brother. After all, they were enemies, and they were responsible for the death of her other brothers. He drew his sword and approached his sister saying, "Get lost," and some other stuff, I'm not kidding, and swung his sword through her. Record scratch sound effect. Everyone went from cheering to, "What the hell, dude?" and dragged him before the emperor, who appointed a people's assembly. The assembly's conclusion is what he did was effed in the head, and they can't acquit it. While the executioner's binding him up, Daddy Hoatius pulls up and makes an appeal. He thinks his daughter being killed was justifiable. Gee, thanks, Dad. And secondly, he just lost 3 out of 4 kids in one day. I know this is messed up, but this is all I've got left. So they acquitted his son on the admiration for his courage rather than upholding law and justice. And last but definitely not least is the very well-known trial of Jesus. The only issue is the Bible is being so edited and rewritten and redistributed. There are too many different versions of the story to really nail down any real ones. So here is what we know in layman's terms. Passover. Jesus and his disciples, actually his name is Jesus, are in Bethany for the occasion. The first 3 gospels say Jesus' first stop was at the temple complex, where he flipped some merchant tables in front of it for selling stuff in a place of prayer like it's a Walmart. Valid. According to the general understanding first proposed by Mark, this event leads directly to the condemnation and death of Jesus. In these first 3 gospels, Jesus and his disciples have Seder, and after dinner they go over on foot to the Mount of Olives, where the famous prayer to God is known to be agony, since Jesus foresees what is to come and he gets 0 response. Where's Dad when you need him? The next day, boom, a mob of Roman auxiliaries snatch Jesus up as Judas betrays him with a smooch. Jesus seals his execution when he responds to the high priest question in court, "Are you the blessed one, the Messiah?" To which Jesus goes, "Heck yeah, dude, I'm the son of come in glory when God's kingdom is established to judge all humanity." Evidently, the high priest was hoping Jesus was smart enough not to admit to a literal jury, but alas, the high priest has to declare this a crime of blasphemy and condemns Jesus for inciting Roman rebellion. There are other contributing factors outside of angry Roman leaders. In Gospel, he's charged for not telling the Jews to pay taxes to Rome. In John's Gospel, condemned because of the growing crowds over his raising of Lazarus. In all 4 Gospels, Pilate is portrayed as reluctant to execute Jesus. He attempts to avoid the decision by offering to release another prisoner, Barabbas, and threw a sop over the now anti-mob by letting them decide. No matter, the crowd cries, "Give us Barabbas," and Jesus is condemned to death for rebellion against Rome, who then crucify him. Alright, thanks so much for listening. Glad you enjoyed. Like and subscribe to see more. Peace out.